Everybody, so welcome back to part 2 in the Jeep tutorial series. So last week we had a look at the Cinema 4D file and we animated the car and we exported it as Alembic. And today we're bringing that into Houdini and we're going to do all of the simulation stuff. So we're going to do the mud simulation, water, all of that stuff. Going to be quite interesting. A lot of cool production stuff in there. So I really hope you enjoy this. Again, it's not a build it from scratch thing like I mentioned in the previous video. I'm walking you through the HIP file. So I'm explaining how everything works. If you want to follow along with the actual HIP file, that is available in the description. So you can get the actual HIP files. So if you want to make your own variation of it, or if you want to just follow along, see how everything works, just pick through it yourself. You can do that there. Anyway, without further ado, let's get into the effects chapter. And then once that is done, next week we're gonna look at the scene assembly, lighting, shading, all of that cool stuff. Anyway, let's get into it.
Hey guys, so we're back with part 2. I think this is the part most of you have been probably looking forward to. But let's dive into it. So at the end of this episode, you should end up with this. So it's a car driving through mud. The effect looks a little bit different than it did on my final render, because I had to it was actually quite a bit of work to make this all work with the file that you're working with now, because I had to move all of the assets locally and like change some stuff, and I had to resim everything because I didn't have the caches, so it actually took a while to get everything to work, but here we are. So it's the car driving through the mud with like all of the detail that we had before. I ran the sim a little bit lower resolution than I did previously, not much. I don't know how long it took to sim, a couple of hours, but it wasn't so bad. So if you run the sim, this should be what you get. So yeah, there's the mud, there's the water, there's the terrain here that we did previously in the Cinema 4D thing. So if you exported that, you can grab your own, and if you you can also just grab the one that I provided in this download. There's stuff on the wheels which we're making. Yeah, that's about it. So let's dive into the HIP file and see how this all works. Alright, so first some global stuff. So there's some HDAs that I provided you need to install. So the shot parameters which I'm using, just an asset that I made. Here's the cam to scale thing, which I guess a guy named Seacow made it. I got it sent at some point by someone, but it's really great if you have cameras, because the scene scale between Maya and Cinema 4D and then Houdini is different. And if you scale cameras down, it also scales down point scales and line scales, which works really looks bad. But in this asset, it has some stuff to scale it down properly. So I have my tracked cam imported here, and then I just throw it into the cam to scale thing, and then everything works accordingly. So you need to install those. Another thing is I made some global parameters here, which I made specifically for this file, because I said I had to move stuff around to make it work in here. So I have a load variable which controls like where stuff loads from. So you need to set your project. So set project. You needed to set it to the root folder of the muddy car thing. And then it should work properly. So for me, this evaluates to W tutorials 2019 muddy car publish. So this evaluates to that. Then a cache variable. So this is set up to cache to the $HIP location. You can change this to $job or $cache. Because originally I made this whole file with everything caching to my cache drive. But to make this work easily with this file, I set it to $HIP. So once you open it, set the $job variable properly, then this should all evaluate. And there's a folder to megascans. which I'm not really using that much in this scene. We will be using it later with the shading and stuff. That's when you need to get a subscription to Megascans to download some of the models. The only thing I use them for in this file is, if I scrub back here, there's a rock here for some collisions. But I cached this out as a BGO as well and just removed all of the UVs and stuff on it, so Megascans won't be mad at me for sharing that model because it's basically a pointless model. So you don't really need to put this for this specific file, but it does get referenced. Let me check where it's. So there's some collision rocks here, and I'm loading them in here. So these do evaluate to my Megascans folder. But again, later on when I'm where I'm making the collisions, I already provided these this geometry. So that's something to start with. So you need to set that up properly, and after that we can start working on the file. So be right back. So if you set everything up properly, here is a RobNet, and this RobNet runs the entire thing, all of the caches, all of the sims. I probably wouldn't advise to run this whole thing at once, because oh yeah, this is something I didn't preview in here, but there's also whitewater being simmed, which it comes at a later step, so that's here. I probably would advise to just run this first and then focus on do the whitewater later. So that part just sims the flip sim, builds the meshes, builds the wheels. I think this should technically work by default. If it doesn't, let me know. But if you set up everything up properly, I think this should run through it, and then you should end up with technically this. So that's how you can run the sim, but let me show how everything in the sequence actually works. So what I did here is I loaded Alembics. So I loaded the proxy mesh, which was, as you know from the previous episode, I had the car rig and I had a proxy mesh inside of there, which is just a cleaned up model, which also moves with the rig. So that's also what's happening here. So let me just turn off the sim so everything scrubs a little bit faster. So that's the proxy mesh working there. We're also gonna use that for doing collisions later in the flip sim. There's the wheels here, which we obviously also need for collisions. And then there's the terrain in here, which is just loading a terrain object, which is what the loading variable again needs to be set for. So this knows where it's gonna go. So it evaluates to loading the terrain. So by default, as you can see, this loads this thing. It's because this model that I saved out here is one that I used for shading as well, later in the shading scene. We'll get back to that later in the shading episode, but using these colors to blend, but that's irrelevant for now, so I'm just clearing that off. So this is not the one directly coming from Cinema 4D, but you can export it and use the one from Cinema 4D. You can change it up and use that. So this gets scaled down by this because these scales are like 100 times off. This one not, because as I said before, this comes from the shading scene as well. So that's where all of this stuff gets loaded. And then I'm going to use those inside of some geo nodes. Alright, so first let's just dive into the car collision. So what I have here is this is the, because we need to make collision geometry for the car, obviously. And Flip uses volume collision, so I cannot just throw this in. Because that won't work. So basically what I'm doing here is I'm just like unpacking this thing and blasting away some stuff. So, and I'm first I'm time shifting it here, obviously, but then it's still it's always in the first frame there. Then I'm transforming it just to a center position. Not quite center, but around that. Then I'm blasting away some stuff which I don't need. So then you end up with this, not that much different. Then I'm putting in a box, which creates a bounding box from this object. So you can see a pretty high-res bounding box. Then I'm arraying this to the car, and then this is what you're getting. Then I'm remeshing it, so I get some more detail. And then I'm arraying it again, and then you get more of the shape of the car. So it's a convex hole, as you can see. Let's go up here a little bit. Right, let me check. So here I'm making a VDB. Here I'm also making this for the front part, and I have the VDB, but it doesn't have the holes which the water can flow in. So I just made a VDB combine, so it at least has something which the water can connect with, and you don't really, honestly, nothing happens that much. I was hoping in the beginning when I was making this, like maybe water would flow into it. That didn't happen, but that's why this part is here. So it's just technically just doing a VDB boolean, nothing too complex, and converting it back to polygons. So then we're left with this polygon thing, but it's all still static, of course. And then we're using good old point deform. So it takes input geometry, rest point lattice, which we can just use this transform position again. So this is going to be the rest position, and then we're going to use the transform position. And then when we highlight this, look through the cam, now we have a collision camera which moves with the original car. There's the original car, and then there's the collision car, and then there's a trail sub to do velocity. And here was some ROP that I can might as well delete that, because I didn't cache this collision thing out, because the thing is you can cache it out. The thing is when you cache out collision geometry, you need to be able to compute sub steps, because at this point here we need sub steps, and in all honesty, like, it takes a little bit to compute this collision volume. It's quite a low res volume, but it's not so bad. Like, in the grand scheme of things, like every frame in the flip simulation is going to run for like a couple of minutes. So I mean, these couple of seconds is not going to be that much of an issue, and I'd rather, when I'm changing substeps inside of the flip sim, for example, back and forth, then I'd need to cache stuff out again with different substeps. Or I could do a time blend in between here, probably. But like, it didn't make sense to cache this out because of the substep issue. Sometimes you might want to do that. Just your substeps with your cache need to line up. So if I put that in the file cache, your substeps that you're doing need to line up with the substeps in your flip sim, else collisions will just completely break. So keep that in mind. So that's the car collision. Now let's move on to the next one. All right, so let's jump into the wheel collision. Sort of the same thing. We have some wheels here. Then we're checking for connectivity, and then we're gonna loop true or for each. And for each of the wheels, we're gonna add a box and array it to the thing. And then we're gonna point deform it. Let's look to the camera. There we go. And then we have some something slightly easier to handle with the collisions. And again, I didn't cache anything out. I was planning to before, but didn't. And then we have this thing because we need some velocity on it. And because we're using the point deform thing, should give us proper velocity. So then we have the collisions for the wheels, and again, we can use this in the flip sim. So now that we got all of the boring collision stuff out of the way, let's go into the preparation for the flip. Right, so if you go into the flip prep, actually what you're greeted with is just two things that load the particles that we made that we're going to make, or actually, which is inside of the collision terrain. I just did all of the preparation for all of that stuff inside of the collision terrain node. So we just jump over and then we can look how that looks. So we have the terrain here, which is again being loaded from here. Then we're loading a water reference alembic, which is just a grid, but it's the same as the one in Cinema 4D. And we're just like boolean out, like just scaling it down technically, and just slightly moving it. And then we're booleaning it with this terrain. And also with this terrain, because as you can see here, this terrain is just a flat thing. We need it for later for volume collisions. We need to have some depth. So what I'm doing here is I'm just booleaning it with this box. So set to intersect, and then you just get this volumetric terrain, technically, which you can use for collisions later, and to cut out the water. Pretty simple. So this is the mud part, and here on the other side we have the water parts, I think. So this is terrain, and let's go in here. So this is the this is the mud part. This is the water part. Sorry again for that. So what I'm doing for the mud part, it's a little bit messy, but so what I have here is I have painted where I want mud to be. So this is gonna be mud, and then I'm just scattering a whole bunch of points here. So I'm scattering 400,000 points. Then I'm doing VDB from particles. So I get a volumetric representation of it, and I'm scattering points in it again. But then I'm getting like a thicker layer. Why I didn't copy it was to get more of a jittered look. I'm not sure. And something else that I'm doing is I have a curve drawn here. Let me go to the camera again. Curve drawn here, create width, and no, that's not what I want to do. Create this thing, doing VDB from polygons, and then I am removing with a volume sample some stuff. So if we look, it's just basically tapering off the thickness here. So it's technically not really doing a lot in this example, but you could like you have some controls over how you want that to affect it. A little bit slow, but you can see what it does. Or you could like make it a little bit thinner in here. So if you'd like control this, like you have control over the over how it erodes. So it's not the most clean setup ever, but and just some color here, grouping it as being mud points. So saying it's mud points, and I'm transferring some stuff, and it's erroring. It doesn't have color here, so I think that's a redundant thing from before. I did the scene cleanup, which I overlooked apparently, and now I'm just time shifting it so it doesn't recook every frame. And water mesh, also just transferring the UV, so we have some UVs on it because our terrain here I think has UVs. Check. Oh yeah, so those came from Cinema 4D. And then in here again, just doing very simple collision volume. We have a box thing now. So this is just from the shelf tools, nothing too interesting. And then we're taking these points and we're prepping them here with some attributes. So we're saying from the mud we want some viscosity. So if we're going in here, so F viscosity is gonna be between 110 and 350. Slip scale and density. So just setting up some attributes So the density of the fluid, how thick the fluid is, doesn't influence it that much, but a little bit. And the viscosity is the most important part here, and the slippage for when it hits the wheels and stuff. And viscosity on the water, so it's just set to 0. Slip skill set to 1. Very slippery, and lower density 700. So this is going to be denser than this. And we're just merging everything in, and we have blue and red, creating a rest position on it, and was just testing some particle stuff here, which you don't really you can delete that, but I think if it doesn't crash, you can see get some UVs on. So that's the flip point. So now we got all of that out of the way. Let's dive into the DOP network and run some flip simulations. Alright, so let me disable this and dive into the flip sim. And it's honestly not so complicated. So I'm loading in all of these, like the collision terrain, the wheel collision. Not even sure what this collision thing is. Let me check. Oh, this is the rock. Might as well call it rock collision, I guess. Rock collision. There we go. And car collision. So these are just the collision objects. Very simple. Some pump velocity. Oh yeah, let's talk about that. While we're talking about the other flip stuff. So okay, we have this. It's a simple just flip simulation. There's not really that much crazy stuff going on. Particle separation here, pretty standard grid scale. Let's go on the flip solver. Let's go into volume motion. So I have viscosity here. Let's check on the like all of the stuff that we have. I'm not completely sure on all of the things that I did. So I think a lot of the stuff is just pretty standard settings. Particle motion. I have surface oversampling cranked up a lot. So what this does is actually quite a nice tip by Dave Stewart. Let me look up the video that he did for this. 1 second. Right, so here's the thing by Dave. Shout out to him. He makes awesome stuff. But you can use like oversample to get more like a sheath effect, so you don't end up with as much sort of splash particles. So this I didn't oversample it insanely amount. I just oversampled it like a little bit. So that's what this does. If you crank it up even more, it gets like a much thicker look. Collision method to move outside collision. You can also set it to well, you don't really want it to do particle collisions actually. Particularly other stuff, I don't think. So viscosity, slip scale. So it's for the slippage. That's what's using the. I'm not even using the control field actually, but I am using the slip scale. So that's using the slip attribute. So this is just for slipping on the mud. Not sure how much of a difference it makes in this occasion, but I don't want the mud to stick too much to like the wheels. So that's what the slip skill was for, which we also set up the attributes for. And I'm not doing anything crazy in here. I ran the final sim for my actual render. I ran it on 0.015. The one from the tutorial was ran at 0.18. So that'll just might make a little bit of a difference, but you can experiment with that. The whole thing is just the turnaround for all of these sims is quite large, so every small change that you make, it will just take hours and hours and hours to sim, which is where the most time went into making this thing. When I originally made this, I literally did like dozens of variations, just running sims every night and just tweaking stuff and coming up with like more like different parameters. And it was also hard to wedge that because I just wanted to add art directed more manually based on what was happening. So that really took like a couple of weeks just tweaking. And Yeah, another thing which I added for the tutorial thing is I had some weird issues with stuff splashing away, which I didn't have in my original file, but I added this in to fix that. So what you can do is if you have pretty extreme like stuff like splashing away, very extreme, you can limit the speed with pop speed limit, and that usually fixes a lot of that stuff. So it says that technically, I think what it does under the hood, I'm not sure if you can dive into it. Yeah, you can. I think what it does, it just checks the length of the velocity, and then if it crosses a certain threshold, so when I set here 6, then it will limit it to that threshold. So that's what this is for. And then some of the other stuff here. So that's some of the pump objects. So let's dive into these pump objects. So let's go into this, and I think I just set this up with like shelf tools, but let's dive into it. So we have this car here, and I am actually, like what I'm doing here, so I'm actually putting a box on top, so it's pretty, like I always, like all my scenes are like this. I hack stuff together usually, but if it works, it works. Because the problem which I was really having is that because the water would really go over the car, so it would like move all over this, and I didn't like the look of that. So basically what I just did is like I just put a box on the car, and I just like it just moves along here, and I'm just creating a like a pump object. So technically what a pump object just does, it's from the shelf tools, but it just creates velocity away from the object. So then when the water gets like on top of here, it just gets pushed down, which is creating this like little wave thing. And again, this is not like scientifically accurate, it's just how I liked it to look. FX is just, I mean, we're not trying to recreate like, well, we're trying to recreate reality. Obviously the point of making this was trying to make it look super real, but we're trying to art direct it as well. We're not trying to do like weather simulations, which need to be completely accurate. They're just trying to make stuff that looks good. And of course, good is superficial. Maybe you'd like it with it flowing over it, and then you could run it with that pump object disabled. But I prefer that look, so that's what I did. The other one, another just basic pump object. So let's check what that one is. So again, I'm faking everything because I knew, because the thing is, water was flowing over here, and I knew I was gonna have grass and plants here, and I already put like a rock here. So if you look at what the water is doing here, it's hitting an invisible wall technically, which is just the velocity from the pump object. But that doesn't matter because there's plants here and there's a rock here and stuff. So you don't like, let me get the file and show you what I mean. 1 second. So yeah, well, you might see it a little bit, but like it doesn't really bother you that it's actually hitting an invisible wall there, but it's not bothersome in my opinion. It just looks as if it flows against like a side thing. So yeah, that was just a thing that I did to avoid it going over here, because I didn't want to have water here with the grass, because it looked weird. Especially because you need, when it's so close, you need more detail there. So I just put some random objects here to create, again, like pump objects, and I didn't want it to flow too much over there, so created another pump object. So it's just creating random velocity, and this is using the old fluid source still, because I made this before Houdini 17 came out, of course. So yeah, that's why that's using that. Let's go in here again and go into the wheel velocity. So what the wheel velocity, it's not really doing that much. What it's doing, it's just, I wanted to have more of an effect when the wheel was hitting the water. So let's look what this looks like. So let's go into the viewport, and you don't see much most of the time. You only see like a wheel there and then a wheel there, and randomizing the velocity a little bit and then fluid sourcing it, so it just adds some velocity on certain parts of the sim. I actually think that this one needs to be this one, but so let's keep it like that. So it just adds some velocity into the sim on those specific rings. So there's not a procedural effect. It's just like something that I wanted to have it more of a like a sploosh, like okay, more of a sploosh type of effect. Again, I was just going through it and like art directing it, and like this is all kinds of stuff that I probably might not do when I'm doing a like when I'm working on a gig and there's a tight deadline, because there's not always time to do as many iterations as I do for something like this, for like personal work, or like really go through it and manually tweak all of the stuff. But that's why I did this thing for. So yeah, that's and of course you have the collision rocks which are there, which I already explained just from the mega scans. All right, so another thing we need to talk about, obviously, is building the mesh. So what we're doing here is we're loading the flip simulation, which gets simmed in here. As you can see, this is fetching this thing. By the way, you can ignore the stuff on the Rob thing. It's just linked to the parameters to this one. So these are correct. So if you change the name, do it in this one. So I'm doing a fluid compress on the sim, because it saves like a ton of file size. Like this is now, it's 30 megabytes, and then when you're unpacking it again, it's gonna take a while. It's gonna be like 835 megabytes for a single frame, which is pretty crazy. So what we're doing here is we're splitting out the mud and the water. So here we have the water, and I'm doing this here by just saying if the viscosity is 0, then it's water, because the viscosity of this water is 0. Could also do it by color, I guess, but and here just the same thing, but selected and delete non-selected. Then I'm clamping it to the frame 25. Not really specifically a reason. I'm generating a mesh here, and meshing stuff is super slow. So let's wait for this to do its thing. So this is linked to the separation, and I just changed some values in here, and I transferred some extra attributes, like wetness, UV, whatever. And then it's all gets cached out, and the same on the other side with the mud. I think it has a little bit different settings. And yeah, the particle separation is a little bit different, and this was all just like manual finding out values. Like I'm not sure if there's actually proper rules for this, but I usually just go by what looks good and what works, and just try out a bunch of stuff and then see if it works or if it doesn't work. And then after that, I'm just for preview saving it here. But all these meshes get saved out to $job publish. So the publishing folder is where all of the render stuff is going to end up. So we're having so this is going to be a render map. So we have a publish folder with some stuff in it, And then the publish fx map folder is going to have the muddy wheels, mud mesh, water mesh, and those are stuff we're going to load in later in our render scene. But then at least when it's in publish, we know it's a published asset, which we use for rendering. So if it's in the regular HIP file, then this is just our work stuff. So we don't need to bother. This is not going to rendering. The stuff that's going to publish is going for render. So just it keeps it a little bit clearer. So yeah, that's building the mud mesh, and there's an out node for the whitewater, which we're using a bit because you need this part for the whitewater. So yeah, and then when you have that, you can run the fluid sim. So that's this one, and then you end up with the mesh. So then we end up with this sim technically, and there's this weird thing here which looks weird, and there's some jittering there, but like honestly you can get rid of most of that stuff like in the render scene or in the comp scene, and probably if you do the full res sim this probably wouldn't be there, or you might need to tweak the original mesh, but that's like I didn't have this in the original thing, but that's what that does. So now final part, we have the whitewater, and so the whitewater is something that's actually I did in a later stage, which is because the whitewater was comped over the actual shot, I think, for the most part. So let's dive in how that was done. So there's actually one more thing that I need to cover, which I almost forgot, is there's mud clumps on the wheels. Small detail, but still important. So we have these wheels, and we want some mud to be stuck between them, obviously. So what we're just doing is pretty simple. So we're blasting away everything but the tires. Then what we're doing is here we have an attribute VOP, and we're using turbulent noise, and then we're adding color on it, and then we're scattering points on the wheels. And we're also doing it a little bit on the inside here. Yeah. And then we're merging that together. So we have some points here. Then I'm copying some spheres to it. So we have these spheres. Then I'm doing VDB from polygons. Then you end up with this clumpy look. And then we're smoothing that. So then we get a less clumpy look. Converting it to polygons. Our rest position, which we need later in Redshift to do some like displacement stuff. Else we have floating noise, which we can't have, of course. And then we're just deforming it again. So then we have nice rotating mud on the wheels, and then we're computing velocity on it for our motion blur later. Velocity, and then when we're saving it out here, and this file cache is still named wrong, so let's call it mud wheels. I'd copy that over. The time shift here is because for some reason when you flipbook it misaligned. Not sure why that was, but I'm just doing that with the $F-1 and just giving them a little color. So that's the part on the wheels which I almost forgot to record. So let's go into the whitewater thing. And it's gonna be very slow because there's a lot of points. Alright, so this looks very crappy. Let me go through it. So you have way too much spray here, but they are, in the old system at least, still separate points. So I can just delete the spray one, and you can see this is the white water sim that's on top of the water. And we'll go more into this in the render scene later, obviously. But and there's one more here that was like it's just doing crazy spray stuff. But basically what it just does is just loads the points. And this all takes pretty long because all these frames are really heavy. like this is like 6 million points and it's 375 megabytes, and this is running now on a regular HDD, not on my cache drive, NVMe drive. That's why a little bit slower as well. So I'm just doing a whitewater source here. Again, in Houdini 17, the whole whitewater system changed, so you probably don't want to do it this way if you make it from scratch now, because there's a better system. But this is how it was done here. So just create the source. I just set some stuff for like minimum acceleration, maximum acceleration. Like I just changed these values based on what looked good. And I load it here again. Flip mesh, let me just put it to manual. And I'm just blasting away the, like only keeping the velocities, because we're gonna load those into the whitewater sim, and it was faster to just like save them out again. So as a, so whitewater velocity, so it doesn't need to load the entire particle sim. So just saves out the velocities here and saves out like the points here. And then we go into the whitewater sim. There's some collisions here. I'm not doing collisions with the car. Apart from that, it's just the same as the other thing. Just a simple whitewater solver with just some settings for everything. Again, in Houdini 17, this all changed. So this is legacy stuff. But yeah, so just some lifespan settings. So it's loading the volumes in there and the points from there, and then just runs the sim, and then you end up with some whitewater. So all in all, not super complicated. Hopefully this was clear. Took me quite a while to build this entire scene for the tutorial. All of the other stuff is coming later with the shading and stuff. I still need to start on the shading sequence for the tutorial actually, which will require you to have a Megascran subscription, but I'll get into that. But so this is just how all of the simulation was done. So there wasn't really any wedging. Again, I just did this by running sims and like really hand tweaking everything until I liked it. And that was like, this project just took really long. Most part for I was just manually tweaking a lot of stuff. But yeah, from a technical point, this is like the simulation stuff here is not really that complicated. In the later part, we will be talking about creating rain and such. So those are that's an extra part. But the next one, the next scene, part 3, will be covering like some of the shading aspects. So doing like look left on the car, and like building those shaders. And then either in that part or in a later part, I haven't decided that yet, we'll do the scene assembling of the whole thing. There will also be a separate episode on compositing. But so I'm not sure when I will have the next episode, but I will update you when it's up. Hopefully this one was informative. I know I went on for quite a while. I tend to ramble a lot, but hopefully it was informative. And if you have any questions, hit me up. Thanks again for the support, and talk to you next time. Bye.